Welcome everyone to another Stop BS Now English class. Today I'll be joined by no one. Covering part 2 of 1984, All Alone. Today's going to be a soliloquy. Should be fun. We're doing part 2 of 1984. Excuse my appearance, my video quality. Not much to look at the best of times. No, what's the word? What do they call that for the stars? Makeup artists. None of them for me. At least not this morning. And I ought to straighten my old tooth. Everything else looks all right. I can see the computer struggling with the lighting. Beautiful sunshine. Part 2 of, what are we covering again? 1984. What a book. Honestly, they teach this in high schools. How dare they? To be taught properly, this book would spell panic for everyone in a classroom. You cannot teach this book. This is a book for revolution or suicide. But we don't always notice. And to be fair, there's some subtlety in the novel. Let's have a quick discussion. I can't do discussions this time. A quick explanation again of who Winston Smith is or alludes to. Most obviously, I think that is Winston Churchill. Yes, the great Winston Churchill, still worshipped, bootlicked around that fine country, England. I believe even Barack Obama had the good taste to throw out the man's bust from his office. Obviously, the names have some similarity. Same first name, Winston and Winston. Old Winsome, not very winsome. Winston. What are the parallels? I mentioned earlier that I think in the first class that Winston Churchill was an aspiring writer. I just checked the Wikipedia page. I don't normally for anything important, but in this case, it was useful. And Churchill was also an aspiring journalist. And we know Winston Smith fancies himself something of a writer, rebellious writer, not to mention his day job is working for the media, just as Winston Churchill did in the, was it late 1800s, early 20th century, even went to South Africa to make it big. So big parallel there. Winston Churchill for the newspaper business and Winston Smith being essentially a government paid article reviser. Very similar. One more important similarity and rather significant for today's focus on part 2 is the fact that both Winston Smith and Winston Churchill had love affairs. Yes, I won't drag up, well, maybe we should, but I don't like jumping around screens. Let me see. The old Wikipedia page. There we go. Marriage and children. Churchill married Clementine. Clementine. Don't we have that word? in this novel too, 1984. Sounds familiar. And he had a brief affair with Doris Castle-Ross. Perhaps she was a aristocrat too, I'm not sure. Not important. Anyway, we should look at the text and move on from this very scandalous, rather parody that we seem to have identified in 1984. How dare George Orwell, a mere author, make a mockery of that English hero, yes, the seat warmer, and perhaps by some accounts, racist, coward, etc. Former Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill. Let's have a close look at this, shall we call it love affair with Julia, who appears to have no surname, none that Winston was able to extract from her. Not that he tried very hard. Excuse my scrolling. Goodness, where are we now? Part. Well, that's not going to work. Here we go again. An appalling expression that looked more like fear than pain. Right, what I wanted to bring to mind was the narrator in this dystopian novel. Please be careful with this narrator. He is an unreliable narrator. He's viewing the world rather as if he were Winston Smith. He's not objective, he's not omniscient. He knows precious little. He's astonishingly stupid and naive, as is Winston Smith. I almost said Churchill, excuse me. This is the incident where Julia and Winston first meet, or shall I say, almost touch. It's the exchange of the love note given by young Julia to the middle-aged Winston. My argument will be that unlike what most of your teachers, professors, and online information sources would have you believe, Julia is not, what's the word, an innocent player in this. She is an agent. Can't be sure that she's just working for herself or someone else. O'Brien, perhaps. But all the clues, if we look for them, will suggest that everything is planned. She's only using Winston, perhaps first for sex, and then secondly as a score on her card for hits. Her plan is to destroy Winston, a long-term plan, to betray him. We have no evidence that she was tortured, nothing except what Winston imagines happens to her. So with that as the background, let's look at the specific evidence for this always looking for those good adjectives. This scandalous perspective. Julia as a big fake. We should be getting used to looking for fakes in this day and age. Excuse me, with our big Corona drama playing before our eyes. It's fake, fake, fake everywhere, as the good investigative journalist John Rappaport constantly reminds us. Fake, fake, fake. Good stuff, John. Okay, we have Julia here saying, oh, it's nothing, after falling on her already injured elbow, supposedly injured elbow. Or was it wrist? I only gave my wrist a little bit of a bang. Thanks, comrade. With that, she walked in the direction in which she had been going, as briskly as though it had really been nothing. First clue. It was nothing. It was a fake. There was no damaged elbow, no injured elbow. And she felt like a stunt woman. Yes, she knew what she was doing. They had been standing straight in front of a telescreen when the thing happened. That's not curious. Coincidence? Perhaps not. She performed her little fall for Winston, pun intended, very deliberately in front of the telescreen, because her masters want to see how their plan or her plan is developing. Initially, Winston, being of course rather paranoid in general, thinks this might be a trap, but very quickly his lust overpowers his paranoia, and all his suspicions are forgotten. After reading the I love you, what does he feel? For several seconds, he was too stunned even to throw the incriminating thing into the memory hole. When he did so, although he knew very well of the danger of showing too much interest, he could not resist reading it again, just to make sure that the words were really there. And this was quickly followed by a feeling as though fire were burning in his belly. He becomes obsessed very quickly. Well, the man is highly repressed, little pleasure in his life. So this is a little crumb being tossed to the hungry dog. So he's obsessed very quickly. He did not consider any longer the possibility that she might be laying some kind of trap for him. There you go. It wasn't long before all his there you go. It wasn't very long before he dismissed all his suspicions, tossed prudence to the wind. She's not laying a trap for him. Alas, she is. As more evidence will suggest. One more point I wish to address is, or perhaps one more argument I wish to dismiss, is the claim that Winston is at all a hero. By no stretch of my imagination can he be made into a hero. Let's see. Why do I have Ampleforth, this section highlighted? Ampleforth, the hairy-eared poet, wandering limply around the room with a tray, looking for a place to sit down. Ampleforth, the hairy-eared poet. What kind of narrator do we have here? Someone making fun of poets and of people's appearances in general. The hairy-eared poet. Is that really the most relevant feature, the most important feature that deserves a mention? Hairy-eared. I believe I have some hairs growing in and on my own ears. I wouldn't want to be remembered so much for those hairs. I haven't put much effort in it. I don't think they deserve. Anyhow, they don't deserve being remembered. Poor hairs. My point here is, don't take your narrator in 1984 too seriously. He's superficial, naive, and perhaps even corrupt. Anyhow, this is the first little discussion between Winston and Julia. Julia is in charge, taking the leading role. She's wearing the pants, as we say. Winston is completely passive. Whatever you want, dear. Good thinking, dear. I'm not of the mind that a man should never listen to a woman, but Winston is incapable of action. He is. He fits Hamlet's character type even more than Hamlet. He's remembering this little song here, "You owe me 3 farthings." The song will become more important later. He's intending to meet Julia at this point, outdoors, during a parade of prisoners, I believe. He gathered from some shouted remarks that a convoy of Eurasian prisoners was passing. Remember, this is written shortly after World War II, shortly after convoys of a number of visitors, types of prisoners, as well as, most notably perhaps, or famously, Jewish prisoners. You'd expect the protagonist to have some feeling, some sympathy for these prisoners. Winston Smith, not capable of sympathy, not even close. He's too corrupted. I don't mean politically, psychologically corrupted. Consider the next passage. An enormous prole and an almost equally enormous woman, presumably his wife, seemed to form an impenetrable wall of flesh. This is disgusting. Descriptions of other or fellow human beings. Husband and wife, admittedly doing something disgusting, are here described by Winston as if they're not even humans. He does tend to dehumanize the proles very consistently. Great hero, yes. What do I have this highlighted for now? Oh, goodness. This wacky computer. There we go again. Men in shabby greenish uniforms were squatting, jammed close together, their sad Mongolian faces. Gazed out over the sides of the trucks, utterly incurious. Occasionally, when it, well, why should they be curious? Incurious, like there's nothing up there. I'd say that applies to Winston. He's not really curious at all about why these people are prisoners. Occasionally, when a truck jolted, there was a clank of metal. All the prisoners were wearing leg irons. Truckload after truckload of the sad faces passed. Winston knew they were there, but he saw them only intermittently. His mind is occupied. He's got love on the brain. Love on the brain. Well, that our culture loves to do that. It loves to sell this culture of love and beauty. This is really a culture of obsession and possession, which drowns out any other intellectual activity we might have been engaged in. Certainly prevents us from engaging in rational thought about anything. That's how love has become corrupted. It's become infatuation, obsession, and possession. And this is Julia speaking again to Winston. Listen carefully, you'll have to remember this. Go to Paddington Station. With a sort of military precision that astonished him, she outlined a route that he was to follow. This should be viewed as another clue. Military precision. She's supposed to be a fiction writer. Well, she does work on a machine that writes fiction for her. Nevertheless, the narrator notices military precision about her report, about her information, suggests that she is more than a office worker. She may be an agent for some dark force. The military. Then get away from me as quick as you can. She need not have told him that. Right, this is after discussing the instructions. She says, get away from me as quick as you can. Not quite phrased in loving words, is it? Winston should have noticed, and he did note that she should not have, or need not have told him that. He was well aware that it was time, or maybe he just felt it wasn't loving. And that would have been a correct intuition, one he chose to ignore. The last lines of the chapter remind us that Winston is heartless, right? And he's obsessed, oblivious to the political reality around him, the injustices committed around him. Oh, I see I've provided a nice link here to a study that demonstrated that young people, college students, over time have exhibited less ability to empathize. That's a troubling sign, isn't it? And that's where our culture is taking us, to a place of, well, as Winston says, we are the dead. We have made ourselves dead. So let's be alive again, people. Let's look for life again. None of these deadheads who are giving us our reports on the news, our political deadheads who wouldn't know how to, well, maybe they do know how to smile, fake a smile, wink, express much. Goodness, even in these times, this corona drama, I'm watching our noble leaders speak with really no emotion. Trump, for example, is about as monotonous as they come. Even Barack Obama's military-style cheerleading for the nation, we can do it together, blah, blah, looks lively compared to Trump. But maybe I'm giving Obama too much credit. Chapter 2, I think we finished. Oh, maybe we didn't. A hand fell lightly on his shoulder. He looked up. It was the girl. She shook her head, evidently a warning that he must keep silent. Ah, yes, they're at the park. He's been picking flowers for Julia. And he heard someone coming, was too afraid to look. When she arrived, she touched him, shook her head, and he/the narrator interpreted that to mean he should keep silent. When to me, it's clear that if you want a sign for silence, you put your finger in front of your mouth. If he's picking flowers and she's shaking her head, she doesn't want the flowers, Winston. She's not interested in your signs of love and romance. Goodness. Acrobat reader. Technology. The sweetness of the air and the greenness of the leaves daunted him. Already on the walk from the station, the May sunshine had made him feel dirty. I don't even want to guess that word. A creature of indoors. I highlighted that because it emphasizes how detached, and detached might be the wrong word, how screwed up Winston's relationship to nature is. He cannot appreciate the beauty around him, spring bringing nature back to life, at least bringing the landscape back to life. It makes him feel dirty. The city should make you feel dirty. Remember that. I remember the first lines with the dust swirling in behind him. That's city dust. All right, so their first meeting in the park, very romantic. Doesn't work out so well initially. Winston has no physical desire. Maybe that's understandable. He really doesn't know Julia. And he's not used to taking any action on his own initiative. He needs a little stimulation, as we'll see, before the lovemaking can start. Here he's finally curious about her name. Well, you might ask her name before engaging in sexual mischief. Julia, I know your name. Oh, Julia says she knows his name, sorry. It's Winston Smith. Naturally, he wonders, how did you know that? Well, she's being rather coy here. I expect I'm better at finding things out than you are, dear. I expect that. Pure rhetoric. She knows. Why does she know his name? One guess, she's on the inside. She's getting her info from secret intelligence, big brother. Winston confesses that he worried that she belonged to the thought police. In response, she laughs delightedly. She's highly amused. Of course she is, because she is with the thought police. If she really cared about him, she would reassure him. Oh, I don't belong to the thought police. You poor thing. Well, that would be funny too, I suppose. She does. Not the thought police. You didn't honestly think that. Well, all the signs suggest that she does belong to the thought police, and to the inner circle, the inner party. So, one of the another bit of evidence for that. She brings, what does she bring? A slab of chocolate. And this is high quality chocolate. Winston wonders, where did you get it? Oh, the black market, she said indifferently. No, she's lying to you. She's pretending that she's not stressed out by your questions. Actually, I am that sort of girl to look at. I'm good at games. What does that mean? I am that sort of girl to look at. You're deceptive, all appearances. I'm good at games. She is indeed. Uh, how does that connect with the black market? It doesn't. She's good at deceiving Winston. And she certainly spends a lot of time doing what the party wants her to do, going a little overboard if she's actually a rebel. I always look cheerful and I never shirk anything. Always yell with the crowd. That's what I say. It's the only way to be safe. Yeah, this should be clear evidence for Winston that she is not interested in taking risks for improving her world. She's going to play it safe, which should raise more concern about her encouraging Winston to become a revolutionary, to go to O'Brien and plot with him. It's the only way. She's only interested in being safe. So if she's going to O'Brien and claiming to be a revolutionary, we can guess that that was a fake. In no way was she taking any genuine steps to join the whatever revolution there was, the Brotherhood. And here on the next page, Winston is curious about her age. Why would a young, pretty woman like you, be interested in a ugly middle-aged man like Winston? It's a fair question. She must have had her choices. Later, she confesses that she's had quite a history of romance, playing the honeypot. Let's be upfront. Playing the honeypot with older men, leading them to their destruction. Okay, them, yes. As soon as I saw you, I knew you were against them. Yeah, so she has spotted him, identified a potential rebel, and she's going to turn him in, betray him. The narrator correctly, I think correctly interprets them to mean the party, and above all, the inner party, about whom she talked with an open, jeering hatred. Jeering hatred? Not very mature, is it? Is that the kind of person you wish to partner with? Not such a good choice. Of course, jeering hatred sounds rather exaggerated. And as we know, Julia, the fiction writer, is also quite the actress. So jeering hatred is not easy, not difficult to fake. The narrator compares her reaction to the inner party to the sneeze of a horse that smells bad hay. Yes, it seems not very, shall we say, cerebral, just a instinctive reaction, no intelligence behind it. Not that horses are not intelligent. Not here, she whispered back. Come back to the hideout. It's safer. Oh, yes. At this moment, she manages to, delay the sexual ritual. Must be very frustrating for poor Winston. He wasn't ready earlier. Now he's ready, and he's told to hold off for a moment. Yes. Sometimes that's not so easily managed. What do we have here? It was with that same magnificent gesture by which a whole he's describing how she flings off her clothes with the same magnificent gesture by which a whole civilization seemed to be annihilated. What utter rubbish. There's a little English for you, rubbish, British English. Winston Smith is really in a fantasy world, somehow imagining that his little adultery amounts to a radical rebellion against the values of his culture. Sorry, Winston, the government really couldn't give a shit whether you commit adultery or not. The whole sexual revolution might not be very meaningful in terms, politically at least. My apologies to all the sexual rebels of the 60s, 70s, I suppose including John Lennon, although for him it was not, of course, sex, it was love, brotherhood among, and sisterhood among all peoples. Good paragraph here. His heart leapt. Scores of times he had done it. He wished it had been hundreds, thousands. Oh, right. She has just confessed that she has slept with many men, destroyed, well, at least one, and not cared much for that person. That was another good clue. Anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with wild hope. Who knew? Perhaps the party was rotten under the surface. Perhaps. Why perhaps? What did I write there? Yeah, not perhaps. It's obviously it's rotten. Isn't that clear? Well, the narrator is not so bright, so perhaps. All right, here's Winston fantasizing again. That was above all what he wanted to hear. That she loves sex. Not merely to love the love of one person, but the animal instinct, the sex drive, the simple, undifferentiated desire. That was the force that would tear the party to pieces. Yes, Winston, you are delusional again. Wouldn't you love it if just having sex could fix everything? Good luck with that. It occurred to him that he still did not know her surname or where she lived. Bell's alarm should be ringing. She doesn't want you to know. She's an agent. She wouldn't want any revenge when you figure out what's happened. Although, as it turns out, you never figured it out. Poor Winston. Here's his fantasy again, summed up in one sentence. Sex is a blow struck against the party. Adultery was a political act. Oh. There's Julia organizing their little rendezvous, this time in a radioactive zone where an atomic bomb had fallen 30 years earlier. Curious choice. She doesn't seem to care much about life, her own included. The ruinous church, the church is in ruin. Well, it's a good symbol for not just the fact that, of course, communists, what's the word, prohibit religion. As I mentioned earlier, this is not simply a novel about the Soviet Union and communism. This is about any country with a government. They're all big brothers, aren't they? And we may not be prohibiting religion, but religion has fallen to the wayside. People don't have time for it, and people like to be entertained a little better on the weekends than a priest could possibly provide. So the Runist Church really applies to our secular culture as well as to any communist culture. Why is it 30 years? The atomic bomb fell 30 years earlier. That would put the story around 1976, this chapter at least, 1978, depending on when you place it. You place it after Nagasaki or after the publishing. Poor Winston he's very patient with Julia. They rarely meet, rarely make love. That doesn't seem to bother Julia. And Winston is desperate enough to cling to this relationship. He's got nothing else after all. Here's another revealing moment, revealing how heartless, soulless, and dead Winston is. A rocket bomb must have dropped quite near at hand. Suddenly he became aware of Julia's face a few centimeters from his own, a deathly white as chalk. Even her lips were white. She was dead. He clasped her against him and found that he was kissing a live, warm face. The bomb likely injured or killed many others. Is he aware of the rest of the world? No, his world has become Julia. She's alive, nothing else matters. To hell with the other women, to hell with the children, never mind other men. So many highlights here. What was I thinking? If you kept the small rules, you could break the big ones. This is Julia speaking about her strategy of doing what the government wants on some levels, on the romance and sex level, the marriage level, not at all. So she believes she's keeping the small rules and breaking the big ones, as if a prohibition or the taboo against adultery were a big rule, an important rule. She's got it all backwards. She's a slave to the state, a slave to Big Brother, doing everything Big Brother wants. He really has very little time for Winston. Big Brother is her true lover. And she's breaking little rules, irrelevant ones. Irrelevant one, yes, the adultery rule. The woman Julia is so corrupt, she's even managing to further corrupt Winston. Rather than arranging more meetings between them, she's persuaded him to invest more energy and time into serving the state. This time, doing paralyzingly boring work, screwing together small bits of metal, probably parts of bomb fuses. He doesn't care who will be killed by these bombs he helps to assemble. They are the furthest from his mind. And isn't that just the way in the real world? The United States being the world's biggest bomb producer, most productive producer of military arms. Thousands, millions of people are involved in that military death production industry. Do they care who their products fall on? who their products kill, what children they maim. They don't even know the countries in which their bombs will fall, in which their jet fighters will fly. They haven't a clue, and most of them don't care. Sadly, they think they need their jobs. They really don't know how to survive in any other way. And they're not keen to live in a world without jobs. You couldn't imagine one. Not yet. Julia was 26 years old. She lived in a hostel with 30 other girls. I call BS on that. She seems to have access to good food. She's had many affairs with older inner party members. Somehow, I don't think she's living in a hostel. It's a good excuse, though. If you live in a hostel, you're not about to invite guests to your place. She enjoyed her work. Nice little note there. And yes, she enjoys serving Big Brother. Books were just commodities that had to be produced, like jam or bootlaces. Apparently, she has no brain. Although this relationship to books may have been influenced by the state, which has likely eliminated any book worth reading, any book that might be intellectually stimulating, very much like our schools have so successfully done. Or if there is a book worth reading, they manage to spoil it, simplify it, baldardize it. Is that the word? She had her first love affair when she was 16 with a party member of 60. He later committed suicide. Yeah, I mentioned him earlier. Heartless Julia. Obviously, she's a bit of a honeypot. At the age of 16, though, you must wonder, that's probably not a lifestyle choice. She's been trained, and I think we can find some documentaries, some journalism on this issue too, of young women being kidnapped, stolen, brainwashed, trained to become, to serve the state as sex toys or as honeypots. I'm sure George Orwell was aware of this disgusting practice among our elites. There we go. She hated it, but nothing would make her stop doing it. She used to call it, you'll never guess, our duty to the party. How did you know that? What did she hate? I've been at school too, dear. Sex talks once a month. Oh, what did she hate? With Julia, he felt no. That's Winston's wife, hating sex. Well, is that prophecy coming true? Is that part of 1984? Are we learning to hate sex? I don't think Hollywood is playing that game. Although our schools might be doing their best to make sex look hateful or hate-worthy. Certainly they're not doing anything to teach children the difference between good and bad sex. That's not important, is it? Just watch the dogs. They know what they're doing. All this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. If you're happy inside yourself, why should you get excited about Big Brother? That's young Julia's attempt to psychoanalyze, simplify, and sexualize human existence. I would, it sounds a little bit Freudian, the pleasure principle denied, the pleasure drive, whatever it's called. You have to repress yourself to satisfy the super ego, whatnot. I prefer the interpretation that all the madness we see around ourselves is art gone sour. If people spent more time developing their creative abilities, perhaps they wouldn't be so destructive. I'm simplifying too, but there's a lot more truth in repressed creative instincts than in repressed sexual needs. Here's Julia again expressing quite shamelessly her heartlessness. And here Winston saying, well, I wouldn't actually kill my wife, but it's useless because I'm accomplishing nothing. He would do it if it would accomplish something. But he really feels it's useless to rebel. And this is another big red light. What kind of hero speaks this way? We can't win, can't do anything, don't do anything. Sounds like a recipe for a couch potato, not a hero. In a way, she realized that she herself was doomed, that sooner or later the thought police would catch her and kill her. But with another part of her mind, she believed that it was somehow possible to construct a secret world in which you could live as you choose. Does the narrator really know what Julia is thinking? Is the narrator really omniscient? I don't think so. This narrator is naive. This narrator is Winston Smith, and this is what he imagines about her. It's nothing more than that. Let's go to chapter 4. I've highlighted passages that mention money. Notice they're in a dollar system. Somehow the currency has been changed during the war or after the war, the revolution. If you've been doing a bit of snooping around, you may know that our own governments are hoping to change our currencies, perhaps put us on a purely digital currency. And the day may be coming very soon when we all, well, at least large blocks of this planet will be using the same currency. Effectively, we do in terms of international trade. The dollar is the reserve currency. And when that happens, when we do get put on a new currency, you can say goodbye to your savings, goodbye to your pension, probably. It will be a reset, as they call it. There must be a less euphemistic name for it. A big theft, really. I mean, you're disappearing an old currency and repackaging everything as a new currency. When this happens, there will be big losses, big, unforeseen by some losses. This shouldn't be surprising for us. Winston Smith is now graduated to becoming a possessive. He feels he has, or that he feels Julia is his property, his object. Like I said, from obsession to possession. It was as though they were intentionally stepping near to their graves. This is Winston thinking that Julia and he meeting in this rented room is rather dangerous. Feels like he's stepping near to his grave. And he is. It's a bit of a foreshadowing there. He should have listened to his intuition and maybe done something more useful with his time. If you're going to get caught fighting the system, perhaps it shouldn't be with your pants down. I don't know. Again, Julia shows up with the good stuff. Inter-party coffee. Again, Winston Smith accepts her explanation. He asks her, how did you get hold of these things? It's all inter-party stuff. Hello, does the alarm never ring? It seems not to. And Julia, instead of explaining how she could get access to inter-party stuff, just launches into a little rant about those swine, the pigs, animal farm. Look, I got a little packet of tea as well. Oh, how nice. And I think later she also gets Winston excited by putting on some makeup. It's hopelessly, it's horribly childish and superficial. All right, what do we have here? She's doing something with the wash. Oh, this is the prole, the lady, lower class lady putting up the laundry. And we can see how confused and double thinky Mr. Winston Smith is with regards to the proles. On the one hand, he expects, or he likes to think that the future is with the proles, the revolutionary must come from the proles. On the other hand, he dehumanizes them and is constantly degrading, demeaning them with adjectives like driveling here. The earlier when he compared them to walls of flesh. Similarly in his writing. Again, our great hero, Winston Smith, turns out to be something less than a hero, appears to be afraid of rats. It's almost like we have a reversal of stereotypical roles. You know, the brave, fearless man has been replaced by the brave, fearless woman, Julia. Well, she's brave enough to throw a shoe at the rat. Winston has to cover his eyes. It's quite amusing. There's that word, St. Clements, and Winston Churchill's wife was Clementine. Wow, interesting little song. It weaves its way through this part two. And Winston is constantly trying to remember the last lines, the ending. He doesn't know how the song ends, as he doesn't know how his life will end. He's not aware of his mortality. He's not aware of much, really. The song actually ends with the lines, something to the extent of chop, chop, chop off his head. Precisely what might have happened, or what nearly happens to Winston in part three. I'm not sure why I highlighted that. There's no note, so let's ignore it. After Julia tantalized Winston with her makeup, she herself refers to the makeup as paint. I must start washing this paint off. Yeah, she really did it just for him, just to excite him, just to play with him. She doesn't actually like her makeup. And he didn't ask for it, but she knew. She knew it would get him a little excited, as if she didn't look pretty or young enough. Anyway, does she have any positive influence on him? Apparently, he stops drinking gin at all hours. He seemed to have lost the need for it. Sex has replaced alcohol. It's his drug. Julia is his drug. Just like little Ginny is Harry Potter's drug. Ginny, I think that was her name, appropriately named after gin. Winston was a real gin drinker, but he's grown fatter. Of course, the varicose ulcer is, well, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I can't explain why a varicose ulcer subsides when a man grows fatter. Perhaps he's under less stress. I somehow doubt it. He's eating more, probably more chocolate and whatever else he brings. Sugar, I remember. There was a big bag of sugar. Like he didn't have enough false teeth. I think he mentioned he had 6. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. Excuse me, it's that damn tooth. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. He had no longer any impulse to make faces at the telescreen or shout curses at the top of his voice. Yeah, any heroic instinct he may have had, any instinct to rebel, has quietly been put to sleep by Julia's love spell. Ironically, despite this, she pushes him to see O'Brien and take revolutionary action and take that fatal step into the big pile of shit, excuse me, to hang on from day to day and from week to week, spinning out a present that had no future seemed an unconquerable instinct. Just as one's lungs will always draw the next breath so long as there is air available. To hang on from day to day, from week to week, going through the motions, going to your job, looking forward to some fun on the weekend, fun that might not materialize. He can't stop himself. He says, it seems an unconquerable instinct. Oh, Winston, if you're going to be a revolutionary, you got to be able to say, no, I'm not going to work. I think I can find another way to support myself. Work, after all, means serving your enemy. He is directly employed by the government, and well, in some way, even people who don't work for the government, our big brother, are working for Big Brother. So long as you pay your taxes, you're serving Big Brother. And you can't expect someone to change while you're giving them money to rule over you. That would be like feeding a dragon and asking it to stop breathing fire on you. Yeah, you don't want trouble, stop feeding the beast. Okay, where are we now? To walk into O'Brien's presence. Oh, he has this compulsion to walk into O'Brien's presence, to commit suicide, announce that he was the enemy of the party, and demand his help. It really is a suicide wish. He doesn't have a clearly thought out plan. He's probably just so anxious, so tired of his life that he unconsciously or not has a death wish, somewhat like good Hamlet did. Well, that was far more conscious. More on that another class. She startled him by saying casually that in her opinion the war was happening. Oh, excuse me. This is a very critical passage. Should get it right. Julia startled Winston by saying casually that in her opinion the war was not happening. The rocket bombs which fell daily on London were probably fired by the government of Oceania itself, just to keep people frightened. Ooh, lot of potential here, isn't there? 9/11 come to mind. That little war, or act of war. The rockets, the planes were probably flown by government agents or not flown at all. The buildings were probably destroyed intentionally by the government or by government agents or people associated with the government and other governments. I mean, governments other than the US government. Could it be possible that George Orwell's prophecies apply to more than just telescreens? No, it's too scary. Surely we haven't been dropping bombs on ourselves. Surely we're not developing viruses and intentionally releasing them among our own population. Surely we don't read newspapers that, I think the Washington Post back in the 70s or 80s published an article revealing that the US had performed some 200 experiments, biological experiments, secretly on its own population. But don't worry, biolabs have been, bioprograms have been, what's the word, discontinued, I think, since 1969, according to Big Brother, the US government. Surely all our crises are not manufactured by powerful people conspiring. Surely, well, can I think of other examples? I think more will come in a moment. Just to keep people frightened. Governments do this to keep people frightened. You need a culture of fear to keep you believing that you need a government to protect you from powerful enemies, like the Corona drama. Let's move on. I think I have other places that deserve some attention. It was rather more of a shock to him when he discovered from some chance remark that she did not remember that Oceania 4 years ago had been at war with East Asia and at peace with Eurasia. It was true that she regarded the whole war as a sham, but apparently she had not even noticed the name of the enemy had changed. Well, that's rather funny because it's Winston's job to change names, to rewrite history, to write false news, fake news. And the passage reminded me of the fact that within the mainstream, if you listen to mainstream media, you might become very confused as well about who is America's enemy. Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it Iran? Is it Venezuela? North Korea? Depends on the season. Sometimes it depends on the day. Apparently, Julia doesn't remember the wars of the past. That also reminds me, people do not remember the pandemics of the past, the so-called pandemics. Honestly, there hasn't been anything worth calling a pandemic since the Spanish flu, which I'm coming to believe was not a flu either, but the recent pandemics, SARS, MERS, swine flu, bird flu, there were a host of others I cannot recall, none of which put a serious dent in the human population. Right, here we have, well, let me just read it. He told her the story of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, and the momentous slip of paper which he had once held between his fingers. It did not make much impression on her. At first, indeed, she failed to grasp the point of the story. They were a friend of yours, weren't they? She said, no, I never knew them. They were inter-party members. Besides, they were older men than I was. These are men who disappeared. I barely knew them by sight. They were the old, maybe genuine rebels, if I remember correctly. Then what was there to worry about? People are being killed off all the time, aren't they? Goodness, what kind of world is George Orwell describing? A world in which people are being killed off all the time? Wow, well, perhaps that shouldn't surprise us either. Plenty of parallels to our current world. Perhaps you've noticed the Clinton kill list, I think, is approaching 100. Plenty of people who have tried to blow the whistle on that family have disappeared. Not really disappeared. I think we're using the old-fashioned execution still and suspicious accidents. But yeah, if you were to look at a list of women and children who are disappearing every year around the world, that is not a small list. People are being killed off and kidnapped, disappeared quite regularly in our fine world. Not only in war, as I was implying. Any other examples come to mind right now? Journalists, especially in third world countries, investigative ones who dare to be brave, they are sometimes executed, disappeared. Colombia, Philippines, are rather dangerous places for journalists. Environmental activists end up dead quite regularly. You wouldn't know it from listening to the mainstream media. They do not care about indigenous groups, investigative journalists, ironically, and activists of any sort. And of course, we have quite another way of killing people, that is of just discontinuing their employment. If you don't abide by the rules, you lose your job. If you're not a good little reporter, you lose your job. That's how it works here. It's economic hitmen. We might discuss that book another time, Confessions by John Perkins. Anyway, Julia does not care about all those good people or innocent people. who are being killed and otherwise disappeared. More evidence that Julia is an agent, not working on, not interested in helping Winston. Immediately beneath the telescreen, in such a position that anyone who was watching at the other end of the instrument could read what he was writing. Ah, my mistake. This is O'Brien behaving precisely as Julia did in chapter 1 of part 2. Doing her deed, or doing his deed, precisely under a telescreen. Why? So that his masters can see that he is following the plan. And here's a little more foreshadowing and intuition, which again, Winston Smith decides to ignore. Winston Smith's memories of the past, not very pleasant. We learned that he was quite a selfish boy. We might excuse that on account of the hunger at the time, but he was living with a little sister, and his mother was trying her best to manage and help the family. Yeah, it was quite an ugly little child. But the situation was ugly. He remembered long afternoons spent with other boys, scrounging around dustbins, garbage cans, picking out the ribs of cabbage leaves, potato peelings, sometimes even scraps of stale bread crust, from which they carefully scraped away the cinders, right? And they're finding scraps of food on the street, pieces of oil cake, sounds very English cuisine. Why this immense poverty in this first world country? What happened? What happened might be something that will come true very soon. Although there are people in London and England who certainly live in poverty. Again, the media does not like to highlight that. People going hungry in the States. Again, the media does not like to bring attention to that. 50 million a year on average the last decade have collected food stamps, needed food stamps, apparently, in order to survive. 50 million. That's about a 1/6 of the population. And who knows, this state might be visiting a lot more of us soon, as Big Brother is presently, what shall we call it, destroying the economy with its insane corona drama response, bringing perhaps half the economy to a standstill. That's going to burst the bubble we've created, all the overpriced stock market valuations. Things will blow up. The stock market has already crashed some 30%, I think. The American stock market. I'm not sure about the rest. Looks like we're all headed in the same, they're all headed in the same direction. Again, 1984, rather prophetic. You know, when you stop to think about it, there seem to be no restaurants and businesses in this story. So only government employment. I think we might be headed there soon. Governments are already, or at least banks, so-called government, central banks are buying up everything to keep them afloat, and they will soon belong to those purchasers. Unemployed people are going to receive government handouts, millions of them, and soon they will have to do something, whatever the government asks them to do, they'll be employed by the government if no one else gives them employment, and if they find no way to be entrepreneurial. This is a very ugly memory, recollection. Winston Smith remembers kicking a dismembered hand into the gutter. Does that deserve comment? At this point, shouldn't we just vomit on our protagonist? Absolutely. That teacher still asks students to explore whether Winston might be a hero or not is what should I call that? Ignorant, stunningly stupid, and leads students far away from the truth. The blatant truth, a truth that does not deserve to be explored and questioned in an essay by young people. They should be aware. It should be quite obvious to them and to our teachers that there's no question about Winston being an anti-hero, a worthless human being. My apologies to all the students who have had to take Winston seriously. No, he said a little more hopefully, no, that's quite true. They can't get inside you. If they can feel that staying human is worthwhile. If you can feel that staying human is worthwhile, even when it can't have any result whatever, you've beaten them. They could lay bare in the utmost detail everything that you had done or said or thought, but in the inner heart, whose workings are mysterious even to yourself, those inner thoughts remain impregnable. So here, Winston is convinced, deluded about his inner purity. Somehow he thinks, yes, the government can make me do things, the government can make me say things, but it cannot make me think things, cannot change how I think or feel. Well, this is laughable. What does he think the thought police are interested in? They're not interested in simply monitoring. The whole system is designed to train you to think in the proper way so that you speak and act in the proper way. Acting and speaking follow the thinking. So if you're doing and saying what the government wants, it doesn't care what you think anymore. It assumes that you're in agreement, and for the most part, he is. He might hate what he does, he might hate what he says sometimes, but he does them, he says them, and honestly, the level of his intelligence is exactly what the government wants. He's not capable of critical thinking. He is, right now, he's just a playboy at best, and no threat to the government. All right. Moving on, chapter 8. I have a breather, finally. It struck him that the man's whole life was playing a part and that he felt it to be dangerous to drop his assumed personality even for a moment. This is in O'Brien's office. O'Brien has introduced Winston to his servant / partner. This man, Winston regards with some suspicion, but not enough, sadly, not enough to make him suspect O'Brien, and beyond O'Brien, Julia. No, he's a bit suspicious of this servant, as he rightly so. think I highlighted a little more, another passage. I didn't. Well, that servant was not friendly. As he should have been friendly, of course, and O'Brien should have been friendlier. They are supposed to be revolutionaries, helping each other, finding each other, finally able to speak with one another. O'Brien claims he has turned off the telescreen. There should have been a moment of genuine human feeling and love and excitement about the future. Nothing of the sort, because O'Brien, of course, is an insider planning Winston's destruction, and so is the man, the little servant in the room. Here, Winston is foolishly confessing or claiming to be capable of committing numerous atrocities in the name of the revolution. Obviously, this is a revolution corrupted, or a typical revolution that leads to violence. Nothing like the anarchist revolutions, the peaceful ones, that marked the 1800s from Paris to the 20th century in Spain. Notably, the Civil War is where that seems to have ended. Our surgeons, O'Brien explains, can alter people beyond recognition. Sometimes it is necessary. Does that happen in our world? Why not? Of course it does. When elite criminals need to change their identity, of course they do things like this. Who knows what Jeffrey Epstein looks like now? I can't make any other good allusions at present, but I'm sure someone else has a list somewhere of people who have changed their identity. I think there's some evidence around too that Mrs. Clinton has some doubles working for her. Doubles who probably needed surgery because they don't look entirely like her. Yeah, here's more highlights drawing attention to the servant. And these statements by O'Brien, of course, should have sounded alarms as well, triggered alarms. You will always be in the dark, Winston. You will receive orders and you will obey them without knowing why. That's not how the revolution should work. That's how the status quo works. Everyone's taking orders and not knowing why. Everything is compartmentalized. People are putting together bombs, but not knowing for what purpose. Not specifically, perhaps in general, of course, but not specifically. Why do the children and women of Iraq, Libya, Ethiopia, wherever we're dropping our bombs now at the rate of one every 30 minutes, I believe, during President Trump's 4 years. Those 4 years, well, he's in his 4th year now. The revolution should be very different from this. It should be communication, sharing of information, intelligence, discussion, not one-way communication, order and obey. That's not the future we want. Yes, the narrator reflecting on O'Brien's tone. He has confidence, of course. The politicians always speak with confidence. Bureaucrats and pro-status quo pushers always speak with confidence. And here also, understanding tinged by irony, that is not so common. But of course, O'Brien will be tinged by irony because he knows what Winston does not know, right? This is, I believe, dramatic irony. It's the worst kind of irony of all. When you know something that someone else does not know, there should be no pleasure in that. But Shakespeare turned it into a pleasure generating, some kind of corrupt form of pleasure. And O'Brien is enjoying the same level, the same pleasure. And I, of course, I don't have any pleasure understanding that Winston Smith is ignorant. There is dramatic irony from that perspective. I know what Winston doesn't know, but how could that be interesting? Why was that interesting to Shakespeare? Why did he have to lace his plays with so much foreshadowing? Something sick about that. But don't tell your teachers foreshadowing is just a literary device, a sign of cleverness and genius. You will get no comradeship and no encouragement. No, that's not what the revolution should look like. Where shall we end this endless part 2? Do we need to address this? You will work for a while, you will be caught, you will confess, and then you will die. Sounds like a good plan, Winston. But, he wants to die. And perhaps rightly so. Over here, O'Brien is singing his song, the song he's heard a few times. And he knows that more than Winston, and Winston should be surprised, should be suspicious. Why would you know the lines to that song that's interested him? Well, because he's being monitored by O'Brien. So O'Brien has taken some time to learn this song to, for fun, to play with Winston's mind. Winston thinks O'Brien has just sung the last lines, but he hasn't. As I said, the last lines are about an execution. And I suppose it's meaningful and more foreshadowing. The fact that O'Brien doesn't mention the last lines and keeps Winston in the dark about the execution in those lines refers to the real execution or near execution that's approaching. We're in 7 now, 9. I didn't want to comment much on this section. It probably does deserve comment, but I think I'm over. What's the word? Class time is nearly over. Fortunately, I don't have a clock to watch. A watch to watch. Moving on to the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism, the supposedly revolutionary manifesto written by Emmanuel Goldstein. I don't find much revolutionary here. I find some accurate analyses of the status quo, of the system, of the culture of Ingsoc and the rest of the world. But at no point does Emmanuel Goldstein's book outline what a better world might look like. And the writing itself is turgid or turgid. It's a continuation of the main novel. The voice hasn't changed. It just sounds like Winston again, just kind of bumbling and monotonously explaining. Anyway, at least it provides some insights. Of course, Winston does say he already knew everything or suspected everything that he read in this book. But I think while that might be true for him, for us, we should be looking for how this applies to our world. What we can learn from Goldstein's book. Chapter 1, throughout recorded time, and probably since the end of the Neolithic age, there have been three kinds of people in the world: the high, middle, and the low. The class system. The first sentence introduces the class system. Why is that so important? How is that relevant to us? It's highly relevant. The class system is ignored, and knowledge of it is censored in all our educational institutions. It's our capitalist masters do not want to bring attention to this reality that an upper class exists, a lower class exists, and mobility between the two is highly restricted. But everyone keeps dreaming the dream that they will climb that ladder and join the elites, the inner party. So it's highly relevant. I think all our humanities, sociology, psychology, philosophy, literature classes, all these classes should be drawing attention to the existence of a class system in our world. Did I forget political science? Yes, of course, but they don't. That is because our rulers would not benefit from drawing attention to the unjust political / economic structure of our world. What do we have here? Oh yes, a little criticism of the religion of technology. I quote, "Nevertheless, the dangers inherent in the machine are still there from the moment when the machine first made its appearance. It was clear to all thinking people that the need for human drudgery and therefore, to a great extent, for human inequality had disappeared." I suppose that's true. We could have technology do all our work for us. Increasingly, it is doing that. But the lower classes are not benefiting from that. No one is being liberated from labor. Everyone's still at work, or worse, I suppose, unemployed. So technology is not being used to liberate anyone from jobs so that they can sit on a couch and do nothing. But as this passage points out, and as Goldstein's book explains, the ruling class doesn't want to have a liberated or a working class that's liberated from work and as rich as themselves. Yes, we're able to produce yachts for everyone if we wanted to, instead of nuclear bombs for everyone and 1,000 bullets per head. No, we could produce yachts for everyone, mansions for everyone, 3 fridges for everyone, 5 cars for everyone. It's environmentally unsustainable, something that perhaps wasn't so obvious to George Orwell at 70 years ago. But as George Orwell argues here, or Goldstein argues, the ruling class does not want everyone to be like them. They're enjoying the game of being the only ones with everything they considered wealth. It's about power, not just about having enough money to live in luxury. No, there's great pleasure, a sick pleasure in controlling others, suppressing prosperity for others, deceiving others. It's a game for them, a sick game, of course. The great mass of human beings who are normally stupefied by poverty would become literate and would learn to think for themselves. A little optimistic. You know, there are plenty of people who are well off, and living leisurely, but are doing precious little to educate themselves. Certainly not learning to think for themselves. They are usually glued to a tube. In the long run, a hierarchical society was only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. Again, this is all true, and it's not anything that will be taught in our classrooms, except the Stop BS classroom, of course. The essential act of war is destruction, not necessarily of human lives, but the products of human labor. A war is a way of shattering to pieces or pouring into the stratosphere. Yeah, thanks to industrialization, we do overproduce. We have ghost cities. We have stockpiles of weapons, and we love to make things that are disposable or that need to be upgraded with new models, all deliberately. So if we wanted to, we could create a world in which everyone has everything they think they need. To prevent that, wars are very useful. Just destroy everything. There's much more money to be made in rebuilding a society than in just pumping more money into overproduction. You know, sometimes the elites need to destroy all the excess and start over. I think that's what's happening now. So many businesses will be destroyed by this corona drama. The stock market will be destroyed. Bonds might be destroyed. Yes, I shared this yesterday with someone who was studying the biolabs around the world. Someone rather shocked about this fact, another fact that is not taught in school, not even in biology class will they talk about bioweapons. Very interesting part of our history and current situation. So yeah, that's what science has become. According to Goldstein, most of science is, most of the scientific thought is being invested in destruction, military departments, and tools for surveilling, monitoring people. We're not putting much money into developing useful technologies, life-enhancing and technologies. When Americans invest half of their taxes into the military, and the military is the main source of technological progress and invention. I mean, the cell phone came from the military, the internet came from the military, digital watches came from the military. Then, you know, science has been utterly corrupted. Let's go. Hopefully we're approaching the end of this extremely meaningful part 2. Here's another passage that seemed very relevant to our time. The plan is, by a combination of fighting, bargaining, and well-timed strokes of treachery, to acquire a ring of bases completely encircling or one or other of the rival states, and then to sign a pact of friendship, etc. Well, here we go. The US has roughly encircled China and the Soviet Union with its military bases and weapons. And well, will war ever happen? According to Goldstein, war can't happen because the rulers of these, what does he call them, the three rival states, Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia, they're too powerful. They would destroy each other. So instead of destroying each other, they cooperate. They pretend to be at war. They fake war. And you can see a lot of that going on with all the posturing between China and the United States, Russia and the United States. It's just a game, I think. Perhaps it's a serious, perhaps there are players, especially on the American team, who would actually like to have a hot war. But I think, generally speaking, they know that it's not feasible. So the game continues. Keep the whole world in a state of fear, thinking they need their government to protect them from another person's government. Wonderful little game they're playing, isn't it? You need this government because that government is evil. And that government says, you need us because that government is evil. That's how it works. Sorry, the governments are the people who elect them and tolerate them. The war should continue everlastingly and without victory. Yes, reminiscent of Vietnam, which lasted far too long, of course. America had no interest in actually conquering that country. It could have obliterated it. It could have brought it to its knees and with better strategies. But it wanted just to be there. It makes, I mean, the military-industrial complex makes money. The longer a war lasts, it makes more money. So it has a motive for keeping wars going. And somehow I don't think Vietnam was entirely victorious when the US decided to pack up and leave. Somehow I feel, I suspect that country is still under America's thumb, but that's another discussion. Other wars that lasted too long, well, the war goes on forever. You might make the counter argument that wars nowadays are quite short-lived. Iraq was short-lived, Libya was short-lived, but on second thought, those countries are really still in a state of war. And perhaps Afghanistan is the best example of the country that's in an endless state of war with the United States, which has been there for some 20 years. Of course, you wouldn't know it's at a state of war if you're just just paying attention to the mainstream media. If you just watch the mainstream media, you would think America's just there trying to rebuild that poor country. In reality, of course, wars are ongoing, rarely reported, and all over the world. We are in World War III. World War III started the moment World War II ended. We should stop looking for wars that resemble World War II before we say World War III has started. World War III will not resemble World War II. It does not resemble World War II. And that's why people haven't noticed it. As strange as that may seem, that people living, unless you're in the war zone, you might not even know there's war on Earth. Yes, poor Winston, again, getting lots of evidence that Julia is not his partner, does not think like him. She's not interested in Goldstein's book. She would prefer to sleep through it. Let's see, interesting passage here. Socialism, a theory which appeared in the early 19th century and was the last link in a chain of thought stretching back to the slave rebellions of antiquity, was still deeply infected by the utopianism of past ages. Infected by the utopianism, using, well, I think this reveals that Goldstein is himself corrupted, that this is not a revolutionary manifesto. This is trying to lead Winston Smith into a dead end. Yes, it explains the corrupt nature of the status quo, but it does not lead him into a meaningful direction, practical direction. In fact, it insults or it degrades the ideal direction, the revolutionary direction here, by referring to utopianism as, good grief, by referring to utopianism as an infection. It's not an infection. Utopianism is like anarchism, the ideal for which humanity should strive. And we don't need this nihilistic or so-called realism about the state of the world being the only state that's possible. But Goldstein dismisses the ideal and leaves Winston Smith with no direction. Goldstein refers to the culture of the Far East as death worship. I think our author had in mind Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, especially Buddhism, and especially Buddhism, perhaps. I know our Western intellectuals are somewhat smitten with Buddhism and sometimes Hinduism, preferring it to their own religion, Christianity, Judaism. I think this is I think George Orwell understood that this is a mistake. Buddhism is another religion created by the state to serve the state, to keep people content. My apologies to all the brave monks who set themselves on fire, but Buddhism does not promote any meaningful, any serious revolution, certainly not anything that promotes our living in harmony with Mother Nature, not on any serious and detailed way. Now, why did I highlight this? I think Goldstein is explaining how cultures can devolve, become less civilized, especially when poverty becomes the norm. People get blamed, aggression becomes common, and governments resort to tyranny. Of course, as my own government is doing presently. Of course, for good reasons, yes, to defend me and to defend everyone from the corona drama. We don't have torture and executions yet. The U.S. has a monopoly on that, at least in North America, I think. Well, I mustn't exclude Latin American representatives, but we already have prison sentences for walking in public parks, prison sentences for walking too close to people or having parties of more than 5 people. It's madness, of course, but our dear government wishes you to believe it's for your good. It's keeping the big brother image alive and well, just taking care of us, of course. In the past, no government had the power to keep its citizens under constant surveillance. No longer true, right? So that's the obvious part of 1984 that has come true. So much else has come true or is coming true. The abolition of private property, look for that to happen too. As soon as this big Corona drama turns into the global world order drama, it already is. People are losing assets. People will be asked to share vehicles, perhaps electric vehicles will be assigned to areas. I don't know, these smart cities are going to help abolish private property. That's the plan I foresee. And honestly, we don't have much private property anymore as it is. Most people are living half a paycheck from bankruptcy or homelessness, and plenty of people are homeless. Those people who own homes actually own mortgages, not homes. Credit card debt is probably at all-time highs. I think even the Chinese have gone down that road. Apparently they now exceed, on a per capita basis, credit card debt. The doublethink, I don't think I want to comment too much on this. It's a form of thinking. I'm sure doublethink exists all around us. People who hate their government, plenty of them, but they will still keep paying their taxes. That's a form of doublethink. You hate them for what they do, but you pay them to do what they do. Chapter 1, Chapter 3, and not actually told him anything that he did not know. Right, that's why you should be suspicious of that book. By the way, 1984 was published in 1948. Welcome back. I bet you didn't know you left. Just a little Wi-Fi interruption. Let's finish off part 2 of 1984. I think I was saying the book was published in 1948, and by coincidence, that's the same publication date of the Communist Manifesto, a century later, of course. The Communist Manifesto being published in 1848. So I think the connection between that manifesto and the book, Goldstein's book, is very clear. Is it a revolutionary manifesto? And by it, I refer to both books. No, as even Winston remarks, chapters 1 and 3 had actually told him nothing that he did not already know. Good reason to be suspicious of that book, if even a, what's the word? Someone as incapable of understanding his Well, he understands the government clearly, but does he understand what, does he understand himself? Apparently not. Does he understand what the future, what a utopia should look like? Absolutely not. He knows he hates the world he lives in, but please don't rely on him to create a better world. We'd be back to the same mess as George Orwell warned in Animal Farm. Regarding the singing, that seems to echo in the background of Winston's life. It was only an hopeless fancy, it passed like an April day. These are all heartbroken songs. This one says, the love that the singer once knew was a hopeless fancy. I think it's a good warning that, a good hint that Winston's love affair is no such thing. It's a fantasy based on his imagination. Julia is no lover. Note here, the stove suddenly, while they are still in their little retreat, the stove has gone out and the water's cold. Is this coincidence? I think not. I think it's a signal from Agent Charrington below. And it gives the poor girl a chance to get dressed before the coming arrest. Not coincidence. I think wouldn't want your naked agent to be caught in a arrest or to be arrested. Too embarrassing, I suppose, for the anti-sex league and so on. Once more, Winston expresses his hope in the prose. He has no intention of being their hero. They will have to be their own heroes. And here the arrest begins, the voice of God. Here comes a candle to light you. Finally, the last lines of the song. Very timely here, as Winston must feel like he's coming to his own execution. Decapitations were no longer in vogue, but decapitations by World War I, capital punishment. I'm not sure what Britain was doing at that time, but Winston, I suppose, is, well, would you think he's lucky or unlucky not to be executed, knowing what we know about part 3? I think that wraps up part 2. Thank you for being with me. This is a long discussion of a very revealing and timely novel. It's been timely for a long time. With that, this is the end of the Stop BS Now English class. We'll continue with 1984 next time. Thank you, and good night. Good afternoon.